Welcome to NeuroNoodle's Neurofeedback and Neuropsychology podcast featuring tech legend Jay Gunkelman. He is the man who has read well over 500,000 brain scans. Our goal is to provide information and promote options for better mental health. The NeuroNoodle podcast is supported by listeners and businesses just like you. Mindmedia.com. Get the latest EEG and neurofeedback technology from mindmedia.com. Their semi-dry sensor cap is a wonder to see, and their EEG amplifiers have been trusted in the field for decades. Their Neurofeedback and QEEG courses will get you up to speed in no time. Visit mindmedia.com now. You says you have a heck of a story, Dianne. What is your story? Welcome to the NeuroNoodle podcast.
Hey, thank you. Thanks for having me. My story, wow. So that's a big question, really, because it's a long saga. So I will try to condense it. But I found neurofeedback over 13 years ago, seeking help for my son. I had two boys. They're about 19 months apart, opposites. You know, youngest had no impulse control, and the oldest was a button pusher. So we had a lot of disruptive, behaviors in the household. And the youngest, really, he even got kicked out of multiple different schools and programs. So I tried private school, homeschool, boarding school, homeschool, military academy, and I would get a phone call. We really love him, but he's not following the program. You need to come and get him. And not everybody really loved him either, because he came across as that 110% boy with a bad attitude,
Yeah.
So I'm struggling all of those years just looking for different environments, thinking that if I find the right place for him, or the right, extra parents, because I was a single mom, find the right environment for him, then he would be okay and be successful. It wasn't the case, and he ended up in a school for quote unquote troubled teens, which I tried to avoid from the time he was 5 years old until he was 12 going on 13. And at that point, I was introduced to the founder of a neurofeedback company, who was about a year into business, trying to make it easier for chiros to incorporate neurofeedback. And he said, that's the kind of kid we can help. So I went through the training and got in my car and drove a system from South Carolina over to, I say nowhere, Utah. It was Kanab, Utah, and set up neurofeedback in that therapeutic program. Saved his life.
So how did it start? Because there's some moms that just tune in. You never know when somebody's going to catch a podcast. We have a few hundred of them out there. The very first one, I believe, is called A Mom's Neurofeedback Questions Answered.
Wow.
If a mom is just, that's the number one, and that's been the most popular. But as a single mom going through it, Dr. Marie's popping in. So if you see her hopping on, what were some of the questions that you were asking? Because when you got introduced, I believe you got remarried and you got introduced that way. I believe I saw from your biography, but I'm sure you had to be skeptical at first. What were some of the initial questions that you want answered?
Yeah. So honestly, by that point, because I've gone through so many years of trying other things, little experience with the medication, which was horrible because it took his personality away. And I thought I'd rather have holes in my walls than this kid with no personality sitting there. So by the time I did get to the neurofeedback, I was already questioning, I'm like, there's something got to be going on with him. He's smart. He understands. Why can't he pause before reacting? So I started to kind of imagine there might be something neurological, and took him to a pediatric neurologist anyways, right? So we were thinking maybe it's Tourette's, maybe it's something like that physical. So I was okay with it when I was introduced to this is brainwave training. It made sense to me, but also I was at the end of options. So I was like, it kind of makes sense. Tell me what it is. I dove into some of the books and research, took the training, and it had to work. And it did,
Well, Dianne, if a mom is tuning into the show, and I'm going to ask this question of everybody that comes on, what is neurofeedback? How do you answer that question?
Yeah. So since I've been in the field for 13 years, my goal is to simplify it. Neurofeedback made simple. And so I use layman's terms. And to me, the version of neurofeedback that I use is just technology-driven learning. It's using technology to measure brainwave activity and help the brain learn new, healthier, better regulated patterns.
Dr. Marie Swingle, say hi to Dianne Kosto.
Hello, nice to meet you virtually.
Nice to meet you, Dr. Marie.
Yeah, it's interesting. I got on a little late today. Apologies, but just the little bit I heard, it's such a common story of being introduced to the field by a need and desperation. Yeah, that's changing now, though. That's totally changing now.
Thankfully.
The other thing that's extremely common is it's the very last. I mean, you've tried absolutely everything, and somehow you stumble into finding at the end of the road, basically neurofeedback and biofeedback as an option. It's
right.
It's a testament to how bad we are at promoting our field, you know.
Right.
But we've been a circular firing squad for 50 years, so you know, it's obviously not an effective technique for promotion.
You got it right.
So
yeah, because I was thrilled when I found it. And when I went into that therapeutic program, not really being a big fan of all the labels, ADHD, ODD, all those different things, I wasn't a big, believer in all of that. So I go in there and I start looking at brainwave patterns, and I have this captive audience of these teens that were sent to this program because they couldn't function in their normal school, their normal home environments, but they were from intact families, single parent families, adoptive families, different states, different countries. The common factor was they all had dysregulated brainwave patterns. And I was only looking at CZ, doing the old traditional, theta beta ratio and looking at alpha blocking. And based on that, I'm like, whatever they want to call it, there's something going on physically in these brains, right? And then when I saw the results, I was certainly thrilled for my son, but I was a little bit mad because of what you said, Jay. We didn't hear about that all of those years, not one professional. And I sat in rooms full of them. They didn't mention neurofeedback. So that's what I'm setting about to change.
Yeah, that's what we're trying to do with this podcast, one click at a time, and thank you for coming on to help us out. With your kid, I mean, did it start out with a brain map? Because usually that's what piques someone's interest. Like, oh, wait a minute, there's something objective that I can look at to point to say, oh, wow, I need to, there's the dysregulation is there. Was that your aha moment, or did you do the mapping at the beginning?
No, I wish I had a brain map many, many, many years before, because even my parenting approach would have been a whole lot different. I kept trying to be the tough mom and not give in, and because you get judged as not being the disciplinarian. So I was the opposite, and I bucked heads with him. Had I had that brain map and saw he had no impulse control, regardless of what he wanted to do, I would have approached it differently. So I only had the hopes and the training and the system, and looking at that CZ, a couple of ratios, and figuring out what to do from there.
13 years ago, it wasn't as common as it is now. The percentage of the professionals in the field using full EEG, QEEG has gone up over time as the cost of the devices has gone down and the depth of the understanding of some of the people in the field has gone up, as kind of is being more utilized.
Since then, a few years later, I did have the maps, and I have to say, I set up about a half dozen offices, and that was a key. People just seeing that information and having something measurable to show what they've been struggling with for years, that gives them so much hope. And then the understanding that, okay, now we know what it is and we can measure it, we can help change it too.
If you don't mind, I'd like to loop back into, where do you start? I think it's fabulous now that we can do, full maps, but there's, especially with children, there's a large proportion of the kids that come that you just can't do a full map on. So I think it's really lovely that we've advanced, but the fact that we have the option with a very, shall we say, wiggly child, a polite way, children on the spectrum, children with extreme hyperactivity, etc., that we can just steal information from a site quickly and get going. And as we help the child to literally quiet, then we can go deeper and deeper. But I think it's really important to remember that we have multiple ways of going in now, which is fabulous.
Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Like I said, when I started, we just did one single evaluation, and I had the success rate in that program was 100%, which is crazy.
You got it all.
I was blown away. How can this help every person that in some way? Not that everybody was perfect, but I saw people starting to sleep better. I saw them reducing medications in staff and students. I was serving the whole group, 6 days a week. And it was mind blowing. And so, yeah, even with the single channel, we had great success. And I still use that a lot. When we can get a map, certainly I do, but we'll always start to just calm and balance the central nervous system until and if we get a map, if we can.
So how did you hop over all the hurdles? I mean, out of pocket, you had to go somewhere to get it. If you're in a rural area, it's, tough to get. I mean, cost number one, knowing about it, number two, getting there. How did you overcome all of that?
Yeah, I thankfully had really great credit and was in deep debt. So that's what happened to me. But that was because I was sending him, trying to send him to multiple programs as well and funding that. Fortunately, the doctor that I went through the training, he actually lent me the system until I was able to, I was at that program providing it. And I said, hey, you guys should build this in to your tuition and charge for it. It's a valued service. So we provided that at a discount, which offset some of the tuition. And then I went out into the field to actually provide it. So that became my livelihood, to become a trainer, to teach other docs how to do it and to provide it in multiple offices. I think there's a big difference now, though, with some of the home training units. We have a really simplistic home training unit that families, we can provide for about a third of the cost of in-office at home with supervision from a distance. That's a big difference, but I'm able to speak to those parents that are looking for all those solutions for years. Like the amount of money that I spent doing all of that versus, even if it's $5,000-$10,000, that's like less than 1 month in one of those therapeutic programs. So when you put it into perspective, it's a drop in the bucket. and I don't mind telling them that.
So how do you overcome the medication hurdle? Like, I'll just take a pill, everything will be fine.
Well, most of the parents that I have dealt with see that only lasts so long, and then they've got to figure it out all over again, and so that might, until they get tired of that might not be our client.
So there's an end game to this, right? I mean, you're working out the brain, once the pill is done, the half-life is over, the symptoms come back. You're seeing great results. Don't you think we should have this in the schools with the counselors, or how would you introduce it? Because it seems
absolutely to me do. I absolutely do believe it should be in all of our schools, because that's where it started with my kid, right? That's when they started telling me, hey, he's having some challenges. Hey, he's ran out of the building. He's not cooperating. And if we had that as a resource, it would make the teacher's job so much easier. I mean, just like they go to computer lab, math class, PE class, they could go a couple times a week and better regulate their brain with technology. I mean, why not? We have not one public school, but several. It's in a public school district in Wyoming that saw that and understood that and used some of their special education funding to purchase systems and place it in elementary, middle, and high school. They're using it sparingly, though. I'd love to see them using it more widespread.
I want to give a shout out here to Mary Jo Sabo. Maybe we should ask her on, this was over 20 years ago, in New York, Yonkers School
Right.
District, a tough district, and she was really, really pushing for it. And she sent us all her testimonials in terms of what this was really doing, but politics. The other one I want to, Jay and Pete love me and hate me for this, but this is the fact that this can do this, we always think of the positives, but there are also the negatives, in terms of, we would really need something so structured that we only do well, we don't do harm. The other is in terms of, is this only for remedial learning? Is this only going to be for behavioral problems? Or, do the schools want to get into the peak performance element? I mean, once this is in the private schools, and I have worked with very, very lovely parents with good intentions, but they over push their kids. So, in terms of, pushing for accelerated learning, you can literally create anxiety disorders with this technology as well. So I'm all for it, but we gotta do it right. We gotta do it right. Am I banned now, Jay and Pete?
I was waiting for you to pop in on that, Dr. Marie.
Yeah.
But okay, Dr. Marie, she's got all the degrees. Me and Jay, we're just a couple guys. He's only read a 500,000
Jay is
brain
anything
scans.
but a guy here.
He's only read 500,000 brain scans. He doesn't know anything.
Right,
but,
right.
Mr. Humble, Mr. Humble there. Yeah.
But what? And I know you're going to cringe, Doc. But what is the worst thing that can happen if you do neurofeedback wrong? You get a headache? I don't want to simplify it because you got moms and dads listening.
Yeah,
where can we go wrong? What's the downside?
Yeah, I'll simplify it. And there's a horrible term. I forget how long ago, but it was to pop a kid. Okay. And the fact that it was used so simply in that term, states a problem as well. This was before we had the massive increase in autism, when autism really was not on the radar. It was an extremely rare condition. And we were dealing with tons and tons of children with diagnoses of ADHD. And so most of us were working with children with ADHD, and the most common protocol was theta beta at CZ. Well, if you have a child who's on the spectrum and you don't know they're on the spectrum, and you're training beta up at CZ and forward, you are going to exacerbate all of the symptoms. It's going to have exactly the opposite effect. And it can take years, and I mean years, to reverse that back. So I don't think it was too secret, but slowly but surely. Jay, do you remember when all of a sudden we were only doing theta down at CZ? It used to be theta down, beta up. So yes, we can do a lot of damage. As I said, if your go-to point is here and you want betterment here, if you press the button in the wrong direction and go for a nap, you're going to bring the individual the wrong way. So this is extremely powerful, and that's why I'm tongue in cheek in terms of my humor here, but I think it's very, very important for people to to realize the power of the instrument. And with anything with power, you have to wield it well, with wisdom, with some restraint, and either full-blown education now is available. In the early years, we had full-blown mentorship. But if you don't have mentorship or education, you're putting people at risk.
That's interesting. I have never heard that about what you just said about the autism. And in my 13 years, we rarely have someone that doesn't respond well to low beta up, beta down at CZ. Very rarely, but maybe it depends on the beta band that you're training. And yes, you need to know what you're doing, and having
some definitions of low beta are that it's SMR. So
exactly. Thank you, Jay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Brain Master, for instance, their low beta is the SMR band. So
right.
But my grandmother told me not to dive in the water unless I knew what's under the surface. And
Right.
I think that goes for clinical work as well. It's nice to actually take a good measurement of the person, so you're not going to, dive in on a rock when you start your work. You can train the wrong thing. Neurofeedback,
Right.
although it's not an uncommon thing to hear, oh, there's no side effects. That's a ridiculous statement. I mean, if you have no side effect, you probably have no power.
Yeah.
So iatrogenic side effects happen. There's a collection of them. Corey Hammond does lectures about iatrogenic side effects and carries around well-documented cases where something was done wrong and the case went south, and how to handle it and all of that. Historically, when we had meetings, there were people would get together and share in a train wreck sharing. I had this little kid come in. He was an autistic, and I did beta training, and I blew him up. And what happened and why, and what would you do differently, and so people would learn from other people's mistakes, and it's become less and less common for people to admit they make mistakes. So I haven't seen a sharing of train wrecks happen at a meeting in well over a decade. But they were instructive, so.
It's lost learning.
Right. And everybody was figuring it all out as well. You've
No
been
need
one of
for
the
that.
pioneers of, really just doing some of that trial and error along the way. Because I'm a layperson and a mom, was very conservative with my approach, and I still am. We will only start with the most conservative protocol and for like 10 minutes. And it's just magnitude training. It's no stimulation because, the listeners need to be aware there are different types of neurofeedback out there. And I've
there's lots of different models on how to provide it as well.
Right.
And you represent one that's kind of a unique approach, a parent, and you've got multiple centers. So it's an interesting thing to see this actually work as a business model, basically, to end up with multiple centers that are working.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful, and kudos to you to bringing it out. And going back just a little bit in terms of two comments really. One is trial and error. I think trial is fantastic, but to design our trials in a way to minimize error. So that's our responsibility. But the other is, what is the definition of a side effect? If we take, the classical pharmaceutical definition of a side effect, it's that in order to get this positive, you will have to tolerate this negative. Okay. I don't like that model. Okay. And if we use that model and we do neurotherapy correctly, it doesn't exist. And again, when we promote ourselves and counter to the pharmaceutical industry, I think that is the way we should speak. There are no side effects as per the way the pharmaceutical industry defines it. But I think, as Jay said, we just kind of ran away with that. Now, there's a difference between a side effect in I would say, constructing constructing the definition. When you do experimental, this is the projection of what we expect to happen. And we are going to be monitoring these other things because we know these are the potential caveats. So we're going to keep equal eyeballs on the potential caveats so we are going to stop what we do, before we, do we call those side effects at that point? Potentially. Okay. Yes. So that's where we get into the same definitions as the pharmaceutical industry of balancing the positive to the negative, and whether the positive outweighs the benefit, the negative. So it's that classic benefit risk definition. So can we split the definition?
Right. I
Well,
think that monitoring is really key as well. And that's another important aspect of it. So like you talk about people that, have gone the wrong way for so long that it takes years to reverse. Well, if you're in there watching it, like we're in there looking at the trend graphs and everything, a minimum of every 10 sessions. And if you're paying attention to that, then you don't cause anything that's going to be that long term to try to relieve it.
Thank you. I'm going to jump on that. Watch the data, data. And if you hook up, 20 kids in a room and then walk around the room like a monitor, and you're not leaning in and looking at that data, so there are safety models that we should follow. Like, how many lifeguards do you need at a pool? I would say, depending on who's in the pool, if you have, older kids that need to swim a little bit, and okay. But how many lifeguards, how many docs?
Well, isn't there two models to go to market here? One is the symptom removal business, and that's where you get caught in the weeds. And then there is a dysregulation detection business where you do the scans and you give the report. I like that first model because it keeps me out of the weeds, because we say this all the time. It's not one thing that caused the problem. It's not going to be one thing that's going to fix it. You have to look, people are lazy. Okay. Working on your brain is hard work. Okay. I don't want to tell somebody to go to the gym. I just want to say, you know what? Here's your blood pressure. If you want it to go down, here are your choices. Pick one of these. So what is the downside of just doing the scans? Because Dianne, we're talking about the schools and all the politics you have to go through to get neurofeedback in there to get rid of the symptoms. What about the dysregulation detection, where every year you have to go in and get a physical, right? Well, why aren't you getting that from the neck down? What about from the neck up? What can we do to get schools to say, you know what? Here's a baseline of where the brain was at this time, and there was a traumatic event, playing hockey or soccer down the line, and comparing the two. That seems a lot easier than trying to convince somebody you're going to get rid of the symptoms.
Yeah, I have two
after
comments onto
Dianne.
that. Okay, two comments onto that. I love that dysregulation as well, because I haven't gone around talking about I'm going to fix this symptom or that symptom. As a layperson, again, I'm very cautious about that because I am not going near it. So our whole goal is to help the brain better regulate, regardless of what it is. So we're going to use technology-driven learning to help the brain better regulate. And then as far as the schools and the politics and that before and after, I agree with you. It should happen, but do they want that data on the sports teams or not? I don't know. Unfortunately, I think some parents might, and some might not, because then you might have to pull them out of the sport if you really do see injury.
That'd be
Ready?
bad.
Ready?
All right, I locked and loaded. Go, doctor.
Yeah, no, I want to talk about genetics and epigenetics. Okay. When we go in without symptoms, what we're looking at are liabilities. Okay. And if we're looking at liabilities, then you're talking potentially about risk assessment or not. And for many of these measures that we see, you need some kind of an environmental trigger for them to express. O1 is a classic region, which, as we all know, modulates stress tolerance. Okay. And if certain ratios are low in the occiput region, your likelihood for addiction is very high. Okay. But so is your likelihood for extreme athleticism. Okay. So is your likelihood for extreme genius and production. Okay. Because that energy there, I talk, you've got a hook in the water, and it's just going to be a matter of what that hook catches, whether it catches sport, whether it catches drugs, whether it catches entrepreneurialism. But essentially what you have is a busy brain, and a brain that needs to be fed. So it's a matter of what that brain is fed. And my concern is, if we do this in school, we'll say, well, young Sylvia has a high liability to addiction, we need to put her in, right? So those are kind of my fears. And unless we really, really figure out the politics, I I'd be reticent because, as you said, we're all naive until we know something, and majority of parents are going to be very naive. And if you have a school counselor or whatnot going over the liabilities, you're going to freak a lot of parents out. And even in the worst case, air quotes, worst case scenarios, some conditions where it's kind of like 50-50, you're going to have the condition, the twin studies, et cetera, schizophrenia. There's a running line that we use a lot in our lectures, which is, if you have in twins, you have a 50% chance of getting schizophrenia, but that's not the interesting statistic. The interesting statistic is you have a 50% chance of not getting it. So yeah, I'd say let's just keep yapping. So because we all want it in the system, but when it makes it in, everybody is aware of the caveats and that we all do good.
I have a question on that. What do you think about, not every kid is going to be trained on the platform dives, right? But they can maybe do some stretching and push-ups, sit-ups in gym class.
Yep.
So aren't there neurofeedback protocols that we could use in a very conservative, basic way to help the brain as a whole, never against what the norm is, to just better regulate a little bit so they rest better maybe and can function better, something to that effect where we keep it very conservative like that?
Jay, what about breathing?
Introduced
breathing exercises.
Yeah, that's why we introduced phys ed in the schools. Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
For the body.
That's my envision of it, rather than getting into those complexities like you're talking about.
And this is reflected at the FDA because you have 510K clinically licensed devices where they can only sell them to clinicians, and you have other devices that are considered general health and wellness devices where they can be sold to anybody who has the cash to buy them and intent to use them. And there's the general health and wellness device, as long as it's used in that way, is an appropriate thing. People deserve to have the right to look at their brain activity and experience what alpha state's like and that sort of thing, just as a self-exploration. But at the same time, the general health and wellness device needs to be used that way, not suddenly marketed as a medical tool that in the same realm that a 510K style device would be. So the field has got a broad spectrum of kinds of models, and again, your model right now has multiple offices, and that kind of success isn't that common in the clinical end model, where it's more common to see a clinical single practitioner or perhaps an institution with a handful of practitioners. But it's interesting to see how all of this kind of plays out, and getting neurofeedback as a finding that's more commonly available. It took forever for you to find it, obviously. And how did you finally run into it? What was the little trigger that you suddenly, that flag popped up that neurofeedback was an option?
Yeah, it wasn't even me finding it. I had married someone who had interviewed that new provider in Hilton Head Island, South Carolina, that just got into the business to help chiros make it a little easier to incorporate into the practice. And then he introduced me to him, and it made sense. I started researching it and waiting for the training so that I could get my hands on it, because my son was at his last rope. Even the founder of that program didn't know what to do for him at that point. He was too impulsive to even go into like a wilderness therapy or anything. So
it was word of mouth from somebody, as opposed
word
to
of mouth. Yeah.
No
Some
professional...
people would say divine intervention, God's hand, whatever you believe.
You don't see highway billboards, that's for sure.
No. No, I mean, it was really all of those years from when he was
Yeah.
5 until 12, like just pulling my hair out, really. So it was
I'm
amazing.
going
Our
back to
first
the
highway billboards here, though.
Well, if you've been pulling your hair out, it looks like you got mine.
It's growing back now. I'm getting there.
Yeah, paste it on your chin. Getting back to the schools, I'm not letting this go. Okay, let's put neurofeedback to the side. At the end of the day, we want betterment for our kids, right? What is the downside to teaching kids HRV or how to breathe? Like, what's the downside of that? I don't get it.
Yeah, I don't see that there is. And I really think that needs to be a component that's being brought in. And I have partnered with someone as well to look at more nervous system modalities that are kind of fun that can help people like that. The virtual reality, heart rate variability, the balance boards, different things like that that they could use. And I think in addition to a nice conservative neurofeedback protocol, it would help balance the entire nervous system and the brain.
But the reason I bring it up, it's so simple that it could be a gateway to other things, because at the end of the day, you want to show that you have control over your body or certain parts of your body, right? And breathing, all kids freak out with tests, okay? That could be something. You have physical education, of which everybody tries to opt out of it. If you would have some type of mental education as part of the physical education, Dr. Marie, you don't agree?
Well, no, I mean, what part are we fixing? What part is broke, or broken? Why are kids freaking out about tests? Why are kids so anxious? Are they not prepared? Is it the culture of fear? The other component I want to loop into is, I think to a certain extent, our children are too over controlled. And the reason why they're going wild is because they're so boxed in. The second you take away the box, if we go back to some of the early literature on meditation as well, the purpose of meditation isn't to calm. The purpose of meditation is to annihilate the self. Okay, so please go back to the earlier literature. So I think, yes, if you want to teach breathing and calming techniques in HRV, absolutely. But also teach, if you're feeling that bad, okay, run around. Hop in the water, climb a tree, get that energy out in really positive way. So I'm very concerned about this whole calming movement for children. Sit down with a bunch of 5-year-olds. Do they want to sit there and meditate on the trees? I would say probably only 10% of them. So again, it's a yes, but I'm really concerned about everybody hopping on this train that's actually counter to the development of children. And maybe I'm being a bit too harsh, but I think we need to really respect the development of the person. And it's not just about quieting. It's about, many children and adults for that matter thrive psychologically with activities where the brain and the body become aroused together and then come down together. Okay. The problem with many of the things that we have children do, and don't get me going on this one, but I'm talking a lot about the gaming and the technologies. We bring them up and then we leave them there. Okay. That's the problem. We need the ability to cascade. So I think we need those type of activities for children. And then I think we also need the, children to learn how to quiet. For example, what most parents are extremely familiar with is the bedtime routine, right? That this is an absolutely necessary skill, if not neurophysiological skill. So yeah, that's just careful about the unidirection.
In physical education, I think stretching and breathing are the beginning of every single class.
Yeah.
Teaching somebody essentially mindfulness about their sport, essentially an attempt to get them in the zone. And that's, I think, also something that's underutilized. Yep. But I'm so far from being in school; it's only a vague recollection at this point, So.
Well, neurofeedback like every day is school. I'm sorry, Dianne. Go ahead.
I was just thinking what the doctor said. I mean, that's a whole societal and cultural shift that we would need. I liked it better too. And that's what I tried to find for my son. I moved so that we would have a little more space, less rules. He could be a boy, climb trees, burn things, shoot things, do stuff that boys do,
And
girls that we all do. That's why I grew up with my brothers climbing trees and doing things like that. But that doesn't fit into our classrooms and our schools and stuff. There's not enough time, like you said, for them to release anything. And I mean, I don't know. That's going to take an interesting lot of a cultural shift to switch.
I mean, our educational system developed, based on fear. So when, in the 1800s, when it became started to become obligatory in Western nations for children to attend school, how did we control the children? We hurt them. We physically hurt them. We hit them, whether it was rulers or throwing, and then at a certain point from the 1970s to the 1980s, we started saying, oh, corporal punishment is not good for children. But we didn't bring anything in. We didn't train the teachers. We didn't retrain parents. And that's where we got methylphenidate. So we never bothered to do the work between corporal punishment and medication. So this is where I question, there's probably nothing wrong with 80% of the kids, maybe 95% of the kids. There's something wrong with us. I mean, quite frankly, where do we get the expectations that children should sit still for 8 hours a day and listen to an adult? Ma, 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 ma.
Right.
I'm on a roll today, guys.
But there are the cases, like my son, that it didn't matter, exactly. and it wasn't. I mean, when I homeschooled him, we were outside as much as possible, and we did, whatever we could, and he still is refusing to cooperate with me. They're endangering us. There's a point where you can't just let that go. You've got.
No, I hear you. But if we're talking about putting it in the schools in general, right. That's what I mean. Yeah, I'm playing around with percentages. They're not real, from 80 to 95. But
I like your thought and your comment about innovating. Like sometimes you need to take that energy up and then bring it back down. And that's what we're doing with these functional programs that we're incorporating with other technologies, where they're doing balance board work, or they're doing, the Resi Max in one hand and they got the glasses on the other hand, and so we're getting all that activation happening, and then doing some neuro and heart rate variability to calm them down too. So we're kind of creating that combination, which I think could work in the classroom. Until we can change our culture and get everybody at smaller, local school rooms and outside more and all of that.
All right, we'll give the schools a break for a second. Dianne, let's talk about Symmetry. You have several centers. I mean, where did you learn business from? Because that's hard to scale this business and have quality control and make sure the sensors are in the right place. Like, how did you start? How did you grow? You got a chief financial officer? Holy crap.
Well, I don't know. There was something in my system since I was a child that was entrepreneurial. Like I remember when I was in second grade, my first business, my dad was just a railroader. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. And I created this business where he would come to the door when he came home from work, because he came home at all different times. I would measure his nose and charge him 10 cents to get in the door. And he went along with it. So I had my little whole business from childhood. I don't know what it was, but I also was in a desperate situation. I had to provide for my family at that point. I had to figure it out, and it made sense to me it was a valuable service that I knew people could, benefit from, and that I could make it work. So when I set it up in that program, like I said, they were charging for other services. It made sense to me that they would charge for that service. And then that helped me with the tuition there. And then I had to leave. So I was able to train someone on site, a technician, to kind of supervise. And I still got in remotely from a distance to manage everything. And that enlightened me because I had to do it, that it could be done. And so I was able to then create multiple locations where I was using that model. Most of it was remote, even way back then, before, pandemic. And I would just partner maybe with somebody that had an office already and just get a small room and set it up and do a presentation and, get a few clients in there and then move on. And then I wanted to actually train providers how to provide this. So I established my equipment, software, training, support, everything that I could do to help providers provide rather than just me in my offices. And then the home stuff came into play. Well, I knew that people needed it at home. So we created a simplified system that I could use at home remotely. So it all just kind of happened because it made sense to me. I don't know.
There's so many listeners out there. I mean, we have moms and dads, we have clinicians, we have docs, and like, I want to get this thing going, and they're just stuck in the mud. Oh, I can't get this thing going. And then you have how many offices now?
Well, I had a half dozen at one, well, maybe 7 at one point, but I gradually have been closing those to help providers open their own offices.
Right.
So it got to be like, I need more people out here doing this than not just me in my offices. So, but we do have 30 like customers. Some of them are therapeutic schools. We have the public school in Wyoming. We have private practitioners out there.
What is the number one thing that a single proprietor is screwing up that they got to fix right away?
My weakness was marketing. And I still feel like that's a tricky one.
Well, how do you market this stuff? It's not regulated.
That's the wrong question for me. I just said that was my weakness. I'm trying to think of the other number one thing maybe they're messing up. The other thing that's important is systems, having a systematic approach in each one and replicating that. But marketing's tricky.
Well, if you want to get on marketing, like, we can't make any claims, right, Doc? We're just training.
Yeah.
We can't diagnose.
Right.
Well, actually, no, I can. So pair up with individuals who can, right? I think one of the things that's very important, Jay talked about a circular firing squad. I think, when we were building up and, everybody had different techniques, there was a camaraderie in that. It wasn't quite a firing squad. It was how the discipline and the science was advanced. And then at a certain point, it just became destructive. And I think it's very, very important for all of us to align and differentiate now. And, I'm not the only one speaking, some of the caution, but I think we need to align to market, but with caution, not just with business models, but with, most of us came into this with our hearts. Okay. And then we went, we can do this and also have a business, have a career, make money out of it. Okay. And it's just a matter of, keeping the spurious business people out, and keeping the people of the heart and the brains in, and stop beating each other up, for the sake of beating each other up, but to have the voice of regulation and caution. I think it should be simple. But the other comment is, artists infamously have been, unsuccessful, again, in air quotes, because they don't know how to market. They don't know the business side. And I think that's also a deficit in our field, that many of us have the brains, we have the passion or the science, okay, but we don't have the business or the finance or the marketing. So that's also where the aligning kind of comes in. And my fear now is that many of the people who do have the marketing and the financial plans don't respect the art of what is neurotherapy, because I think what we do is both an art and a science. We just need help with the business component. Yeah. And Jay, I think you go so far back, and I mean that in a really positive way. Well, I'd say most of the pioneers, they were all doing this out of the universities, right? They didn't need to look where a paycheck was coming from, right?
I was at a state hospital.
Yeah, exactly.
I had a clinical operation.
Yeah. So the problems kind of arose when people didn't have their institutional backing, when we came out of the universities. And that, I think, is where the problems started. it's interesting, but I was talking about with kids, we had corporal punishment, and then we had methylphenidate. And neurotherapy, I think we had the university or institutions, and then we had, business, business, business. Okay, we need that beautiful middle. So please share more in terms of how you jump from your passion to your success. Mm-hmm. And I'm not talking about clinical success. I'm talking about success of the discipline that you're now wielding.
Yeah, it's that art and the heart is super important.
Yeah.
And you have to have that, but you have to understand and never discount that there's a value to that.
Yeah.
And because of everything that I went through, like I said, it was a drop in the bucket to charge someone $5,000 for a 40-session plan. That was a half of 1 month of tuition, and I was in hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt, right? So to me, how could I not share that with people? I had such a strong, I saw the numbers, I knew that this was a value that could literally save my son's life. He would be one of those kids that was locked up somewhere or accidentally killed himself. Now, how do you not value that and charge something and create a cash flow situation for everybody to benefit from? So that's how my mind works. Any way that I could, and I would go into different scenarios and just look at, I would try to find the win-win-win for everyone, for wherever I am, for me and my family, but also for the people we were serving. And if I could figure that out, then it worked. And I would never do it any other way. So I'm happy to help people with that as well. We are creating sort of a licensure model so that we can help people easily with that business end when they've got that heart and the science and the art, and they need that support. So, because I'm all about any way I can help people provide this, I will.
Getting back to the marketing, sales and marketing, the number one thing is to set the expectations. And this is such a dynamic thing that, as Jay says, if somebody says they're an expert in this, run away. It's changing all the time. It's evolving. Everybody is different. There are so many different ways to attack this that it's not just one thing. You have to try them all to figure out what works. And that's hard to sell. That's hard to market. What is it? How are you going to fix this? Fix. We hate that word. Well, it's everything.
Right. That's why I've narrowed mine down to simplistic, technology-driven learning, and we are going to help the brain better regulate. We don't know what's going to happen first when your brain better regulates, but a lot of people find that they sleep better. They start to be able to focus better. Maybe their mood regulation improves. But a whole goal of neurofeedback is to help better regulate the brain. That's what my simplistic message has been.
When people in the field are trying to get an idea of the size of the field, a lot of times they're involved in one of the professional organizations like ISNR or AAPB or both of those, and they're oriented like BCIA. And that misses the general health and wellness groups that are out there, and there are quite a few. And some of them are franchise license organizations. Some of them are more mom and pop small group like you, but there's more out there than is obvious to those who have a more traditional approach to the field. And the other thing is, if you're trying to get an idea of the size of the field and you're in the US and you haven't really gotten out internationally and looked around, the international scene is just exploding. Yeah. South Korea has their own database and active expansion there. Australasia has a society, a well-established society. SAN, Society of Applied Neuroscience in Europe. Italy has their own society. Spain has their own society. Brazil has a large active practice. There's organizations in Mexico. Obviously, if you look at it en masse, the field is exploding. If you mathematically look at it, at the publications across time, the arc up in the number of publications using neurofeedback. I mean, if you don't realize that we're on an exponential increase curve, you're just not being sensitive to what's really going on. It's really quite astounding.
Yeah.
Dianne Kosto, founder, CEO, Symmetry. What is the URL for that? SymmetryNeuroPT.com?
Yes, that is the website.
Okay, we'll put that link right here. And
Is our hour almost done? Wow, did that
Oh
fly?
my God.
oh, it flew. It's this stuff. I think we got to bring Dianne back. Hey, that podcast booker, worth every penny.
Okay. I'd love to come back. I'd love to bring my new business partner as well, who's helping me with all of those other modalities and
Yeah,
bringing
yeah.
them in and why. You
Let's
guys
get
will
into
love him. He's
Oh,
a neuro
yeah.
guru too, so he's got more of the neuro guru speak than I do. But you'll love
No,
it.
we need.
It's so important. I remember years ago, one of I think the best compliments I got in some of my writing was the ability to take esoterical concepts and communicate them to lay people. And that's a major issue within our field. I mean, bless you, Jay, but your knowledge is, out in a very far galaxy. And how do you bridge that so people can understand? And the other is, how do we stay away, because of when you get lack of understanding, you get jargon. Okay. And how do you bridge the knowledge and bring just enough down so people know what they're buying, I suppose, know what they're getting into, whether it's the practitioner or the individual that needs the services. But keep out all of the flashy terms that are just used for the sake of flashy terms.
Right. Well, I have to tell you, I learned that very early on, because shortly after setting up in that program and explaining it to the staff and the parents,
Yeah.
I became the trainer for the company that I had used that equipment for. And I had doctors, chiros and stuff, well-educated, everything, coming to learn this in a 3-day weekend and retaining maybe 30% of it once they got back. And so I'm like, I'm going to approach my training a lot different, and I am going to be repetitive and
Do not use acronyms. Do not use acronyms.
Yeah.
Guys, thank you so much. Dr. Marie Swingle, Jay Gunkelman, Dianne Kosto. Another great episode of NeuroNoodle. We're going to bring you back, Dianne.
Awesome. Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
The NeuroNoodle podcast is supported by listeners and businesses just like you, like our silver supporter, Mind Media. Get the latest EEG and neurofeedback technology from mindmedia.com. Their semi-dry sensor cap is a wonder to see, and their EEG amplifiers have been trusted in the field for decades. Their Neurofeedback and QEEG courses will get you up to speed in no time. Visit mindmedia.com now.